I am the storyteller. Today, I begin reading for you the novel Belladonna Rose, written by Stephen Carlton. It is a story about redemption, about taking control of one's own life in the face of the powers that want to stay in control. Rosita Sanchez is an assassin. She is also a single mother. She lives two lives, but soon she will have to give one of them up. It's not really much of a choice, right? This is the story of Rosita's last day working as the assassin known as Belladonna. She has just one day, one last chance to settle scores, erase debts, and leave the violence behind her forever. But only if she survives. Now here is Chapter 1. I hope you enjoy it. Perched within the cramped ventilation duct, Rose shifted her weight carefully. She had only been in the duct for a few hours, but that was enough to make her muscles start to cramp, and she was more than ready for some action. Fortunately, that opportunity was nearly upon her. The target was nearby. It would not be long. She had been in the bar since after midnight the evening before. Entering as just another patron, no one in the crowded establishment had paid any attention when the Latina in the crimson dress had vanished. The cleanup crew was just as neglectful, making only a cursory pass through the toilets, paying no heed to the loose cover on the duct. Rose had emerged once they were gone and slept lightly curled into a corner of the men's room. Then, shortly before dawn, she had returned to the duct to await her moment of action. She glanced at her watch. The glowing blue display told her it was just approaching 7 o'clock. She peered through the tiny scope, aimed through the grate covering the vent below her position, as the door opened once again. The gangsters occupying the bar that morning had tiny bladders, evidently. They'd been trooping in and out since they'd arrived. Officially, the bar would not reopen until lunchtime, but the men who filled it now were special clientele. They were a collection of the worst sort, but only one of those mattered to her. She watched a short, wide-chested man through the scope as he inspected himself in the mirror. Wearing light blue pants and a white knit shirt, all he needed was a pair of Oxfords to complete the look of a semi-retired gangster looking forward to a day on the links. Which was exactly what he was. No, Sergei Romanov was not much to look at. In Rose's experience, though, the way a person looked had little to do with why they had become her target. At 22, Rose was not the youngest assassin on the market, but she was regarded as one of the best. The contracts that came her way were for people difficult to get to, people whose death mattered very much to someone. Sergei looked harmless enough as he squeezed a few blackheads in the mirror, smoothed back his thinning gray hair and picked something out of his teeth, but he'd pissed off someone. He was going to die, and it hadn't been that difficult to get close to him, she reflected. All it usually took was patience and planning. Sergei, she had learned, was a man of strict habits. His routine was so predictable that she was surprised he hadn't been killed long ago. Just as he did each morning, he went into the third stall from the door and sat on the toilet. He liked being alone when he did his business, and he had enough rank in the organization to ensure that the other men wouldn't disturb him. No one would come to check on him for at least half an hour. Plenty of time for Rose to do the job and make her escape. Carefully, she removed the grate and set it aside. Matching her movements to Sergei's straining grunts and other natural noises, Rose slid, almost silently headfirst through the opening. She managed to avoid hitting the flush on the toilet, turned herself over in the tiny space and lowered herself to the tiled floor. Her outfit was skin-tight so as to avoid snags. The material was almost non-porous, so there was no rasping as her limbs brushed her body. She eased the stall door open and crept out as quiet as a ghost. She paused to draw her knife. The contract was specific. Sergei was to die by the blade. It was not something Rose enjoyed. Her approval or enjoyment was never a factor. She had learned long ago to compartmentalize her life, to segregate intellect from emotion, to keep the two halves of herself from intersecting. Rose the merciless killer was never compromised by Rose the woman. The bathroom wasn't spacious, but there was ample room for the row of 5 stalls, the 3 sinks along the wall, a full-length mirror in the corner. The walls were a garish blue, uncomfortable on the eyes and clashing with the tacky linoleum floor. Everything about this place screamed that it was made by men who believed women had no opinions and had no place here. Rose smirked. She moved stealthily along the row of doors, pressing each one with the palm of her hand as she reached it. Sergei, she was certain, was in the second booth. He grunted again, something plopped into the water beneath him, and he sighed. It nearly turned Rose's stomach. The door from the hallway opened suddenly, swinging outward. Rose reacted instantly, ducking into an empty stall. She leaped lightly onto the toilet seat, any noise she made masked by the sounds of voices and shuffling feet as several men entered the room. The gun was in her hand in a flash, kept leveled on the door awaiting action. She felt the familiar rush of adrenaline, the cold embrace of the fear that was not fear, of excitement that bordered on euphoria. The feel of power. The men spoke what sounded like Italian as they busied themselves at the sink, unaware of the slinking death that was nearly breathing down their necks. Rose waited patiently. "Hey," Sergei shouted, his accent thick. "What are you doing in here? This is my private time, get the fuck out." "Cool your jets," one of the men replied, laughing. "The food's arrived, we just want to wash our hands." The accent was unmistakable. Brooklyn blended with Sicilian. Maybe Sergei wasn't such a little fish after all, not if he was making deals with real mobsters. "Yeah." Another man added in a deep bass voice, "Unlike you Ruskies, we don't like to eat with germs on our hands." The sound of a slap against clothed flesh followed. The man complained, What I say?" "Shut up, you idiots," the third man spoke. That one, he had ice in his voice. Rose's nerves tingled. That one was a killer. "Get out!" Sergei nearly screamed, rattling the walls of the booth. Rose didn't expect that and momentarily lost her footing. She balanced precariously on one foot, teetering before bracing herself against the wall and steadying herself. She snapped the gun back to the door. The men were quiet for a moment. "Yeah, sure," the icy voice said. The others muttered curses under their breaths, but they left all the same. "We'll wash up at the bar. Sorry to have disturbed you." The door opened. The door closed. Rose allowed herself to sigh in relief. "Fucking gangsters," Sergei grumbled. "Can't even let a man take a shit in peace." She waited a moment longer before putting her feet down, listening carefully. The only sounds in the room came from Sergei. Reholstering the gun, she opened the stall door slowly, peeked into the empty bathroom, then slipped out. Sergei fell silent as though he'd heard or sensed something. "Danny," he called out, "are you still out there?" The scent of cheap aftershave floated to Rose's nostrils a second before the door to the first stall was yanked open. A smiling face and steel-gray eyes beamed at her, the barrel of a nickel-plated automatic pistol aimed squarely at her chest. "Well, well," the icy voice said. "Look what we got here, back up." He waved the gun, motioning for Rose to move. She obeyed, keeping her eyes locked on the man's. "What is it?" Sergei called out, fear edging into his voice. "Danny, what's going on out there? Will you shut the fuck up for once?" Danny snarled, pounding his fist on Sergei's door. The fury on his face evaporated in an instant. The smile was back, joined by a smirking grin. He lifted his chin, nodding toward the knife. "Let me have it, carefully." Rose made no attempt to resist as the man took the blade from her hand. His movements were precise, practiced, the smooth control of a seasoned expert. Still, he wasn't perfect. He was only a man. Faced with a woman clad in black, bearing a knife and poised like the killer she was, he had only two possible conclusions. She was dangerous or she wasn't. But he was a man, and that narrowed his choices. He relaxed, his grin spreading into a smile. "Now," he said, holding up the knife, "what did you plan to do with this?" "Who's out there?" Sergei demanded. There was a rustle of cloth as he pulled up his pants. The door eased open and a wrinkled, chubby face peered out. Rose tried to imagine what he saw, how she must have looked to these men. A short, dark-skinned Hispanic girl, jet black hair squeezed into a tight bun at the back of her head, dressed head to toe in a form-hugging jumpsuit. She looked less dangerous than she was without a weapon in hand. She resisted the urge to smile in satisfaction as Danny allowed his eyes to roam her body. He even licked his lips in appreciation. In his eyes, Rose was nothing more than a slender, lovely woman in the wrong place doing something naughty. Not a threat. Not dangerous. It wasn't the first time she'd used that to her advantage, and she screwed up her face in mock anguish, trying to force out a few tears as she took a fearful step backward. "Please," she began. "Don't hurt me. I wasn't gonna hurt nobody, I swear." "I know you weren't," Danny said. He cocked his hips to the side, letting the gun drop an inch, striking an arrogant pose. He probably thought it made him look imposing. Sergei pushed his way past Danny's back and backed slowly toward the door. "It's a woman," Sergei stated uselessly. Danny rolled his eyes. "Of course it's a woman, you idiot," he growled. "I got eyes, ain't I? The question is, what's she doing here with a knife?" "He never called me," Rose said, taking another step back. Neither of them could see the gun holstered at the small of her back. She just needed another 2 steps and she could draw and dodge at the same time. "He slept with me and never called. I just wanted to scare him is all." She added a sob, a roll of her shoulders that shook her 5-foot frame and lifted her hands to her face. "Please," she added. Danny laughed at her. "Damn," he said. "I don't know how you got in here, but you must be really stupid to think you were going to get out of this without getting hurt." He took a step toward her, chasing her as she continued to retreat. "Who was it, baby? Who'd you give it up to?" This wasn't good. He wasn't supposed to pursue her. "Ivan," she said. "There was always an Ivan. He promised he'd call." "Ivan?" Sergei repeated, confused. Danny halted his advance. He tensed, but his smile remained fixed in place. "You don't know an Ivan?" he asked. "Sure, I know Ivan." Sergei replied, then burst into laughter. "That fat pig, I never thought he'd get laid. You must have had some time finding his little prick, eh?" He held his pudgy stomach and laughed as it jiggled. Danny relaxed a notch. Rose took another step back and felt the wall behind her. Not good. Thinking she was cornered, Danny stepped up to her. "Ivan," he said, "did you really sleep with him? Or are you yanking my chain?" "I swear," Rose began. Her hand crept toward her waist, toward the loop sewn into the fabric. One tug would release a choke wire, but she wasn't sure she could bring that weapon to bear at such close range. The pistol was silenced, but now she had 2 targets. She'd been sloppy and things were going to get messy. Behind Danny, Sergei had paused in his retreat and leaned to one side to peer over the other man's shoulder. Danny pressed the tip of her own knife to Rose's throat. Her every movement froze. He couldn't know how sharp that knife really was. "What if I said I don't believe you?" Danny said. He leaned closer until his face nearly touched hers. He inhaled slowly, smelling her, and then sighed. "Please," she repeated. "I'll do anything you want." Danny chuckled. "I know you will," he said. "Don't kill her," Sergei said. Danny inclined his head, not quite turning to look at the Russian, his face deepening into a scowl. "I mean," Sergei added quickly, "don't kill her here. You shouldn't kill a woman, know how?" "She's not a woman," Danny said. "She's a whore. Besides, I'm not planning to kill her, not right away." Rose faked a whimper of fear. Danny laughed at her. The pressure on her throat eased a fraction. That was all the opening she needed. With a fluid movement, Rose drew her pistol from behind her. Danny was just turning his full attention back to her when she pressed the barrel to his forearm and pulled the trigger. The silenced gun made a soft pop, and Danny's arm was flung away. The knife dropped from his hand. Rose caught it deftly. He had no time to even flinch before she slashed across his midsection. The surgical sharp carbon fiber blade met no resistance as it passed through the man's flesh. He staggered back, clutching at the wetness spilling out of him, looking down in utter amazement as redness flooded his clothing. Rose shot him in the chest, then stepped around him aiming for Sergei. The Russian was already sprinting for the door. Rose fired almost too late. Her first shot took him in the shoulder, barely slowing him. The second bullet entered his back and stayed there. He pitched forward against the sink, spun to the side and lurched for the door. Rose went after him. A bloody hand grasped her arm, spoiling her third shot. Shattered bits of mirror rained onto Sergei as he tried to push the door open while leaning against the frame. Rose chopped the butt of her pistol onto Danny's head. He released her, but it was too late. Sergei was out the door, shouting for help in Russian. The door swung closed again, cutting off the sound of his voice. "Shit," Rose said into the echoing silence. It couldn't have gone much worse. There would be the usual group of Russians out there, joined by however many Italians had come along for the meeting. An unknown number of opponents, their strengths unknowable, and the target was not dead. Not yet. Danny stirred, gasping in pain, in shock. Rose swung her gun around and put a mercy bullet into his head almost without aiming. He toppled over into a puddle of his own fluids. There was no sound yet from the bar, but it was coming, and Rose was down to 3 choices. Stand her ground here, which was certainly an advantage for her, or she could cut and run, something she'd never done before. Or she could go out there and kill anyone who stood between her and her target. Not the wisest or sanest option, she told herself, but that didn't matter. It wasn't really a choice at all. There was no time to plan. She knew if she allowed herself to think about it, she might become afraid. A frightened assassin was soon a dead assassin. Using her foot, she rolled Danny's corpse over and retrieved his gun. It was one of those new models, the ones that could go full auto. Good. There were 2 extra clips in the shoulder holster under Danny's jacket, and she took those too. She kicked the stall door open and hopped up on the toilet. She almost wasn't tall enough to reach the vent, but she made it. Her bag was light, reminding her she didn't have many more resources. She jerked out a gun belt and hastily strapped it on. There. 1 more pistol, 6 clips of ammunition, 1 stun grenade. It would have to do. Grimacing, she tossed the bag away and turned to face the door. Okay, she muttered and strode forward. Just around the last stall there was a movie poster tacked to the wall. Spartacus. Rose stared at the heroic image of Kirk Douglas in his gladiator outfit and smiled. "Today is a good day to die," she murmured, then grinned and added, "or maybe not." She flung open the bathroom door and rushed out, guns ready.